Hello, hello, and welcome. Welcome once again to the Secrets of the High Demand Coach podcast. And I am here with yet another high demand coach. It is the one and only Shane Silsby. Now, Shane is a civil and transportation engineer who for over 20 years held various government leadership positions in cities and counties across the United States. More recently, he's worked with as an executive in the private sector with multiple international engineering firms. Shane is passionate about sharing his experience working with and within local government agencies, specifically with emerging leaders. He also provides strategic advice on improving organizational culture, increasing the effectiveness and efficiency of operations, refining financial approaches to capital projects, and establishing goals and accountability metrics. Well, Shane, I'm so excited to have you on the show. Welcome. Before we jump all the way in here, I've got a bunch of questions for you about your book, Managing for Meteors, and just getting this government / private enterprise thing working and getting them working together. Well, what would you say is some of the most important work you're doing today?
And thanks, Scott, for having me. By the way, you do a great job. Appreciate everything you're doing for our communities and the industry. But I think the most important thing I do is try to help emerging leaders. You talked about that a little bit. We all know about the changeover in all the workplaces, but especially on the government side, where continuity of government all the way up to the federal level is so important. We sometimes forget people are moving out, retiring, taking on other lines of work, and the backfill is not seamless, and there aren't enough people with leadership experience to fill all those voids. So we have well-intentioned, motivated people kind of filling in, and so we need to give them support and assistance.
Wow. So walk me through a little bit of what have you found has worked, right? Because it is something that's unique. Most businesses don't roll through an entire leadership change every 2, 4, 6 years, and so it's something that in a couple of ways is unique to it. How have you helped some of these leaders overcome it? And if there are, what are some of the silver linings of a model like that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, what I try to do is set their organizations up to be as efficient and effective as possible. In a number of different ways, so that if that big thing happens, and I refer to it as a meteor, right, a metaphoric meteor, if that thing happens, a political changeover, a leadership changeover, that the structural elements of your organization can withstand that, right? So you're ready for that if you're doing the most efficient and effective things you can. And I cover all the categories of, from organization to finance to programming to addressing politics, community outreach, all those things. Not perfect, but every community is a little bit different, and trying to set them up for success, regardless of kind of what happens as an external factor.
So you talk about this a lot. It's really arguably the main focus of your book is this idea of managing for meteors. So the obvious question here is, are we talking about real meteors, or what is a meteor in the context of the book?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I did have somebody respond and said, hey, I was trying to use this for my science fiction novel, didn't quite work with that. And I said, no. It's a metaphoric meteor, right? And the meteor, as I describe it, are these major disruptors that are happening normally in the government sector, but it could be in the private sector. And it's of such an impact that you cannot do your job and address this disruptor at the same time. And so for that reason, I call it a meteor. And the idea of the book is to try to help you prepare so that when that thing happens, right, you're already up to being as effective and as efficient as possible, and therefore you can withstand some of these other pressures coming at you from these metaphoric meteors, and could be any number of things.
Yeah, I think you made a great point as well. Somewhere as I was getting ready for the episode, that these can be positive too.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you can have a new leader come in that's very motivated and great at what they do and very good at giving direction and accountability and all those things. But if that is a new cultural element to that organization, that's going to come in as an impact, right? It's a positive impact, but people still have to be ready, still know how to address those things. Same thing with an elected leader. They can have some very great ideas. Maybe they're focused on something that the community hasn't focused on before, like sustainability, working with people experiencing homelessness or something like that. Maybe that's their passion. And you as an agency need to be able to adapt and figure out how to address that issue, even if it's a positive impact people are trying to make.
Yeah, it's so true. it's so easy, especially when there's a bunch of negative impact things happening, it's so easy to completely overlook the impact of something that is a positive impact, right? It's still change, it still requires, new habits or new ways of thinking. And it leads me to my next question, which is kind of tied into it. And that is, how do we make time for this, right? For example, so we actually, these meteors, we call them key transitions in our language. Some of our audience may know what we're talking about there. But these big events, I love how you said that change, that make it so that it's not possible to do what you do the way that you do it, right? In some way, shape, or form. And the biggest, at least in my experience, the biggest challenge to working on these things, to planning for them before they come, is prioritizing it, right? It's like, where do you find the time? So how do you help teams justify the time when there are arguably more pressing or urgent needs on the table?
Yeah, great point. And there's only a finite amount of time in the day, and especially with local governments that I try to focus on, their days are packed with many different things, right? Planning for budgets, dealing with public meetings, working with constituents, right? Dealing with big projects. And so one of the things we talk about is how can you approach it strategically? And the way I lay it out in my roadmap for readiness in the book is we start with the organization, and then we go into looking at the team, and then we look at how do you set priorities and goals and all those things. And the challenge is that there isn't a lot of extra time to do that. But at the end of the day, somebody's going to ask you, what are the goals for your agency, or what are your objectives? What are you trying to achieve? If you don't have a good answer for that, that's going to hurt your credibility of you and your organization. That makes it harder to do things in the public sector. And then the second piece of that is it's going to reflect in the performance of the agency, right? One of the biggest things that is a key in government is aligning people, aligning all of your resources to a common purpose. And that's done through the establishment of good structure so you can have communication back and forth, and then setting your goals in a smart way so that your performance metrics and what you deliver then is you can be held accountable to that, and everybody sees that increases your credibility, and then you can do more things. So it's not that you have a lot of extra time. So where do you find the time is your question. Well, you find it in the planning that you would normally do for big projects or big initiatives, but you just alter that to look at maybe some more strategic ways to do that so that your end results are improved and more objective to people who might want to look at those things.
Yeah, it's so true. Because one of the challenges is that, like, you just feel like you're constantly behind, and folks are like, they're looking for a lifeline. Like, how do I do it? And I love this idea of just piggybacking on what you're already doing. Don't make it so complicated. Don't make it a 5-day offsite, right? That you've got to do in Turkestan or some bizarre place. Like, just piggyback on an existing structure and habit is great advice. I love it. I want to shift gears a little bit, if that's okay with you. And I want to talk about, because we've got a lot of business leaders and nonprofit leaders in our audience. And I'd love to just kind of give them a peek behind the curtain of local government, if you will, and see from someone who's worked in both environments, what is the distinct role that government serves, and how's that different from private enterprise?
Yeah, great question. And a lot of people don't consider that a lot when they are maybe being critical of their governments or wanting more. And the basic role of government, right, is to do for people or do for the communities what they can't do for themselves, right? So if you think about it, building a roadway, if you had to have all of the people in the neighborhood agree on where a roadway should go, how it gets done, or somebody's got to take the lead and all that stuff, it wouldn't get completed, right? Or people would argue about the design or the cost or whatever. So government comes in and they deliver things that individually the community members cannot do alone or cannot do for themselves, right? So that's the baseline of it. Private sector, at the end of the day, is to deliver good quality projects, but to make a profit so that they can continue to keep delivering those quality and on-time projects. And the reason why it's symbiotic is the government is not structured to deal with peaks and valleys of resources or staffing or external funding or project needs. So they need the private sector to fill in those gaps and be ready when that project needs to get released or needs to get constructed, whatever the case might be, to help with the reaction time and to kind of be there as a good partner to jump in and provide the delivery on the delivery side.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if you could go a little bit further on that and just kind of share, maybe even to an outsider, right? Someone who's not used to working with government. what are some of the keys to working effectively with local governments?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I work with people on that quite a bit. One of the things is to figure out, as I said earlier, each government's different, right? They have different issues they have to deal with. Could be financial, could be project, could be a community-based issue, could be a political issue. So the best way I find to deal with your local government, your regional government entity, is to figure out what their pain points are, right? What are their goals? Do they have strategic goals and priorities? And where might they need help in delivering those? Because as I said, governments are not set up to have steep peaks and valleys in their resourcing or staffing needs. So looking at that local government you're targeting or government, strategic priorities, what are their goals? And then what are their other needs or challenges? And sometimes you just have to talk to people about this. Like what's the most challenging thing? What are the top 3 things that you struggle with dealing with in your daily duties? And then trying to figure out from a private sector standpoint, how do you fill in those gaps, assist them with those things? Because my opinion is productive, effective government is better for everybody. And so we ought to try to make sure that happens if we can influence that.
What is the cost if we don't, right? If we don't bridge that gap, if private stays private and public stays public, if we don't get folks who can cross that line and integrate the two, what's the cost to us as our communities?
Yeah, great question. I mean, there's a couple straightforward objective costs. Is you're not going to have good infrastructure in your community. You might not have good quality of life because some of your elements are not up to speed, your parks, your bridges, your roads, your emergency response. And so then your communities start to drop a little bit. Then your home values can drop a little bit, or your school systems can drop a little bit. So those are real objective things. But the other piece of it, if we try to impact that positively, is something like the bipartisan infrastructure law for the federal government. All of those funds, the $1.2 trillion in funds, in some way, shape, or form, those are almost all going to flow through government agencies to get through to private sector partners to then help deliver those funding sources. So this might be a surprise to many, but almost no government agency has a construction force, right? They have construction management oversight, but they don't have people going out there and building all these things. That's partnering with the private sector. And then you're designing those things as well and helping fund those. So you've got the objective things. If you don't make the investment in helping and having good government, communities can drop. And the alternative is if you have something come in like a positive meteor, like federal funding, if you're not partnering and supporting, then those funds are not going to get delivered as efficiently, effectively, and as quickly as they could to help improve some of the efficiencies communities might have for their infrastructure.
Yeah, fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. You don't really pause to think about it, but yeah, I don't know that I've ever seen a local, a local county construction company.
Right?
Yeah, it's fascinating. So, all right, I've got a question I like to ask all my guests, and it is this. What is the biggest secret you wish wasn't a secret at all? What's that one thing you wish everybody watching or listening today knew?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the thing I'd like people to think about that might be a secret is that your government agencies don't have it all figured out, right? They need help. It's not that the employees are not well-intentioned, motivated, smart people. It's just that they have, more priorities on their plate than they do time to deliver those. And there are many things that impact their ability to deliver on something that might seem simple. It might be a political issue, might be a funding issue, might be an environmental, regulatory issue, but they don't have it all figured out. It's about the journey, though, right, to get it figured out. That's what I look at when I think about good government employees, is those people that are trying to figure it out. So the secret is it's not all perfect, it's not all figured out, but the flip side is, with a little bit of patience, a little bit of support, we can help them figure it out. And then we'll all be improved. Our communities will be improved for the better. Yeah,
it's fantastic. So I want to, there's a couple of things I want to hit here right at the end. And the first one is your book. So we've talked a little bit about it, but I'm wondering if you could just tell us, who did you write the book for and why?
Yes, great question. I wrote the book really specifically for leaders of local government that are either new to the leadership position, that they moved up maybe 20 years faster than their predecessors, and or somebody that came in, from the private sector into the government sector, and they're trying to lead or been put in a leadership position. And there are certain things, and the book tries to cover this more in a shallow format than really deep on master's or a thesis level on any one category. It's trying to cover as many categories as it can, just so you have familiarity as a new leader in government to the things you just don't know academically or just don't get from general experience in the private sector, or when you're delivering heads down technical work in an organization, even if it's a government organization. So that's the target, to support those folks. And I came to the resolution after dealing with public agencies across the country, and I kept hearing kind of the same story or experiencing the same phenomena, which the people I was dealing with, again, very smart, motivated, well-intentioned, but just didn't have the deep experience. And I was just trying to help accelerate that a little bit.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Fantastic. I had a chance to read a little bit of it myself, and I would recommend, even if you're not in local government, but you want a masterclass on how to handle these key transitions and how to start thinking and planning ahead, just masterful. It's just phenomenal. Couldn't recommend it highly enough. If you work with local government, also just a brilliant read for you. So where can folks get a copy of the book?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And I appreciate your time today. Again, great job. Appreciate the discussion. They can go to Amazon. You just type in Managing for Meteors, or you can go to managingformeteors.com and you can hit the order now button there. There's a couple of things there you can get for free, a couple of exhibits, which might help you try to get aligned in what the book tries to cover. So yeah, love to partner with folks, or if they have any questions, they can reach out to me directly as well through the website.
And that was going to be my next question. So folks are thinking, hey, I've got to know more of what this guy knows. How can they find more out about the work that you do and get in touch with you?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. If you want to take advantage of my 20 plus years on the government side, or working with major global firms on the private side, you can just go to silsby-sa.com, or you can drop me an email at shane@silsby-sa.com. Looking forward to working with anybody who has interest.
Shane, thank you so much for being on the show. Just an honor and privilege having you here. For those of you watching and listening, I hope you get as much out of this conversation as I know I did, and I cannot wait to see you next time. Take care.